One said. The fourth girl from the Jiang family who returned to the capital from the countryside offended the regent, who had the power to dominate the country. She was afraid that her life would end soon. Unexpectedly, the art style has turned into this. Jiang Nai. Prince, I have calculated a divination for you. If you go out before midnight today, you will be struck by lightning in 99%. Regent. What is the way to resolve it? Jiang Na. Come to my Yin Yang Studio to buy a divine artifact, which can avoid major disasters. Dark Guard. Isn't this a pot lid? I feel like you've been tricked again. Is my Wang Pianran's grace more than a pot lid that can be pressed? Let you see, what does it mean to have a pot lid on top of your head with a light breeze? Secondly, the fourth girl didn't recognize a single big character and had no writing skills, so her articles were probably nonsensical. Dean of Shangjing Academy. For girls have knowledge of astronomy and geography, especially in the history and culture of the ancient Jiang kingdom, and have made great contributions to academia. People. Are you afraid you're not talking about the same person? This dean is probably a daycare. The third day. The fourth girl, Kumyuk, brother, uncle and aunt, sisters, must be sent to the temple to rest her heart for several years. Uncle, aunt and sisters. Cry ha, please don't spread rumors. Fate is hard, every time you spread rumors, we all have a collective misfortune. A few years later, Jiang Nai led a small version of the regent to go shopping. My son asked curiously, Mother, why is there still a gambling game in the market where you bet on your father's hand that you will only survive for 30 days? Jiang Na had a guilty expression on her face. This matter should start with a mountain-dwelling picture. Back then, my mother was young and ignorant. She trapped your father in a painting and almost starved him to death, son. What did you think at that time? Jiang Na. I just think he's pitiful. He's so hungry that his waist is too thin. Keywords of the novel. Princess, she has no pop-ups for divination again. Princess, she has also given people divination. Download the complete set of TXT. Princess, she has given people divination again. Read the latest chapter. Chapter 1. Evil fate comes soon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Evil fate comes soon. In early winter, the rain stops at night. Jiang Nai tightened her tight, dirty and colorless cloak and limped into the cave. Looking up, I saw a yellowed ancient painting hanging upright in front of the spacious cave wall. Jiang Na is less than 3 feet tall, with her round little head tilted back. After looking for a while, he murmured to himself, strange. This is a cave in the wilderness, who is so bored to hang a beautiful picture here? The little girl sat down against the cave wall, reached into her arms and took out an iron bead. Without even lifting her eyelids, she flicked her fingers and flew out. The sand and stones rustled down, and the painting fell into her hands. Upon opening up, one can see a solitary wooden building in the painting, amidst the mist of a clear spring, standing a young man with white clothes and black hair, his eyebrows trimmed and his temples set. The collar is slightly open, revealing a snowy skin. My eyes are as bright as stars, and my pupils are colored with glass. Her skin is as white as jade, and her lips are as sweet as honey. Her thin lips are slightly parted, as if she wants to whisper a few warm words in her ear. The painting is truly lifelike and indescribable, as if it were a dream or a real person visiting. The little girl muttered strangely, look at this person in the painting, he has a strange bone piercing through his head, and his pupils are different from ordinary people. He has an inexplicable appearance of an emperor. She casually threw the painting aside, rested for a while, and then went straight to the cave entrance to beat the drum for a while, using stones and branches to make a simple hunting mechanism. Then he fell asleep like a salted fish. Her body is still small, and her physical and mental strength are not strong enough. She must constantly supplement sleep to promote growth. Sleeping into the middle of the night, I was awakened by a faint clatter. Jiang Na sat up and instinctively moved her calf, realizing that the twisted area had improved slightly. The goods jumped up and looked at the entrance of the cave. I saw a small wild chicken with sparse hair falling into her hunting mechanism, fluttering happily. I didn't expect to have to fill my stomach by myself. Jiang Na felt sorry for herself for 2 seconds, then lit the fire and roasted the little wild chicken in her hand, inevitably feeling a little sad in her heart. When I was in Lijiaden before, I used to live a life of salted fish with clothes and food, but now that I have only been camping for 1 night, I feel that my heart is spare but my strength is insufficient. A faint wind rushed into the cave, blowing the flames erratically and intermittently. Seeing that the flame was about to stop cooking, Jiang Nai casually took the yellowed scroll and rolled it up. He lit it in the place where the flames were most intense and threw it onto a dry branch. The beautiful figure slowly burned in the fire, burning slowly upwards from below the scroll. Jiang Na stared at her roasted pheasant with all her heart, only casually glancing at the painting, but her expression suddenly froze. It seems like I'm not feeling dizzy. At the beginning of this painting, the beautiful man in the picture should be standing next to a clear spring in a small building, right? But now, looking back, the beautiful young man actually took off his white clothes and sat quietly in the clear spring. The misty mist permeated his entire body, rising slowly and appearing to exude an immortal aura. This is really a cult. How could the beautiful young man in the painting move? Jiang Na was taken aback and without saying a word, she started a cluster of flames with a tree branch and threw it onto the remaining half of the drawing paper. But seeing the beautiful young man sitting quietly in the clear spring, he suddenly opened his eyes and glared angrily at himself. Those pale glass-like eyes were tinged with a mixture of astonishment and anger. Does the person in this special painting seem to be alive? The little girl realized it later. Could it be that some millennium-old ghost was sealed in an ancient scroll, while I accidentally burned his soul container? Jiang Na. What kind of fate is this? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Get off with peace of mind. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Get off with peace of mind. Since the beam has already been tied, why not don't stop doing 2 things, hurry up and burn it to save this product from coming back and seeking revenge on yourself. Jiang Na acted swiftly, stacking several burning and crackling branches and leaves onto the painting. However, in an instant, the beauty painting was burned to ashes and scattered with the wind, leaving only a faint stream of light surrounding the fire. Jiang Nai's small face was cautious, staring at her for a long time. Suddenly, with a loud bang, my little hand suddenly shrank back. It turned out that I was too focused on that painting, and my palms were splashed with sparks without even realizing it. Jiang Na rubbed her palm in pain and looked down, only to see a hint of light and radiance sink into her palm. She quickly patted twice and blew a few breaths with her mouth. When I lowered my eyes and looked again, I saw a faint red mark the size of a grain of rice on my palm. Jiang Na didn't take it to heart either, thinking to herself that it was probably because she was just burned by the fire, and she would naturally recover in a few days. She didn't even know what kind of living hell she had provoked at the moment. Eating half of the roasted chicken without any taste, this foodie collapsed beside the cave wall and continued to sleep with salted fish. Strangely, Jiang Nai kept repeating a dream all night. In my dream, I saw a beautiful young man from an ancient painting scroll sitting beside me with a cold face. The glass-colored pupils exude a hint of killing intent and cold anger. Who are you? Why don't you let me out quickly? When she woke up in the morning, the little girl quickly got up from the cave wall and looked around with her toes on. The cave is empty and spacious, with nothing left. She raised her hand and touched her forehead, sweating profusely. This guy grilled and ate the leftover chicken from last night, then sat in front of the fire and muttered to himself, "Are you really an old ghost? Forget it, I'll recite the rebirth mantra to him a few more times and send him to heaven early. It's not in vain for me to meet him." The little one sat cross-legged, muttering as if The imperial edict of the Supreme Court, surpassing your lonely soul, haunting all ghosts, and bestowing grace upon all four beings. This guy pinched a meditation technique with his fingertips and muttered to himself, "Don't worry, go ahead and don't come looking for me again. If I get angry, I might beat up your spirit and soul. Be good and don't bother me, just leave with peace of mind, girl. Girl." When Jiang Nai finished reciting the fifth reincarnation mantra, he heard the cries of Chunya ghosts and wolves not far from the cave. The mixed sound of footsteps came from far to near. A slightly aged voice sighed and whispered, "Chunya, I see you don't howl anymore. We've been searching around all night but haven't found anything. I'm afraid fourth miss might have been taken away by the wolf." "You fart." Chunya, a famous and tough girl from Lijiaduaner's 8 villages and 10 miles away, retorted with a burst of anger. "Your whole family has farted, and my girl is still fine. My girl is not to mention very wealthy and auspicious. As our old lady said, she has a golden and jade destiny, and her success will bring her wealth. Whoever gets involved in her wealth will have it." "Humph, you old lady knows how to play ball. How dare you curse our girl for being taken away by a wolf? I see your grandson was taken away by a wolf." Grandma Sue was so angry that she almost couldn't come up. This girl opened her mouth so fiercely that she said one sentence. She retorted in 17 or 18 sentences, even with curses, which was indescribable. You. Mrs. Sue's chest was blocked to the point where a cold light flashed through her eyes. "She's such a vulgar girl. Forget it, it's important to get things done. She doesn't care about these things with her." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Strange Four Girls. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Strange Four Girls. If Miss C hasn't been found back, Chunya, who is a dog slave without a master, won't be able to fight or sell in just one sentence from her own master. Mississippi. The wet nurse who showed great joy and ran quickly past the two of them. As Chunya turned her head, she saw a chubby little girl struggling with her short legs towards the entrance of the grassy cave ahead. Mrs. Sue's face stiffened slightly, and her eyes showed surprise. "The little girl is actually okay. I saw the wet nurse who holding a chubby little girl like a ball and walking quickly to their side." Mrs. Sue felt a sense of surprise in her heart, but she pretended to look surprised. She kept laughing and said, "Wow, we finally managed to find the fourth miss safely. Let's hurry up and get on the road. We can still stay overnight in the small town ahead tonight. If it's too late, we'll have to eat the wind and stay overnight." "Slow down," a coquettish voice interrupted the old lady's words. Several people present turned their heads to look at the little girl who was making a sound. Grandma Sue trembled inexplicably when she touched Jiang Nai's smiling eyes. He was just a 6-year-old chubby little ball, with a pair of dark and deep eyes that looked chilly with frost and snow. "I have observed your appearance, with a sunken forehead and red veins on the bridge of your nose. This indicates that you have recently been injured and may have shown signs of blood, which could potentially affect your life. If you were willing to slap yourself a few times to show blood on your face, it would be able to break through this recent bloody disaster." Mrs. Sue. The wet nurse whose mouth twitched slightly and quickly reached out to lightly pat the back of her little girl. A Mrs. Wang walked by and gave a dry laugh, then pulled Mrs. Sue around and left. The little girl's gaze fell faintly behind Mrs. Sue, and she said calmly, "Everything in the world has cause and effect. If one harbors evil thoughts, they will bear evil consequences. If one does not break this cause and effect, playing with fire and self-immolation may not only bring harm to future generations, but also cause harm to future generations." Mrs. Sue trembled all over, as if she had heard or not, and was pulled by Mrs. Wang, walking very fast. Just in a moment, I heard a scream from Grandma Sue coming from the uphill into everyone's ears. Who was startled and quickly protected the little girl with a wary expression on her face. "Go take a look." Jiang Na remained calm and raised her finger to the spot where Mrs. Su screamed in agony. The three of them walked over and saw a shiny and black little wolf cub, holding a piece of meat and turning to look at them. Who was so scared that her feet felt weak, but she still held the little girl tightly in her hands. Chuanya covered her lips and let out a low cry, her palms sweating uncontrollably. There really are wolves here, she said. I saw Mrs. Su lying on the ground unconscious, with a piece of flesh missing from her calf and blood-stained bones visible. Quickly kill it, kill it. Wang Pezi also collapsed in fear, holding on to the nearby pedals and shouting weakly. Just as the two were about to get on the carriage, the little wolf cub suddenly rushed out from the side. With just one bite, she tore off a large piece of Su Pozi's calf flesh, which frightened the person. The accompanying coachmans, although with a hint of fear on their faces, were not afraid of this little wolf cub, as they relied on groups of 3, 5, or 6 people holding hoes and wooden sticks. A few people gathered in a circle, shouting and shouting, ready to take action. Suddenly, a milky voice came, "Think carefully before you start. If you start killing it, you won't have a way back." A few drivers looked back at her in shock. Jiang Na was too lazy to talk nonsense, just gesturing with her eyes that they were looking at Grandma Su. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Insight into Everything. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Insight into Everything. I saw that Mrs. Su's legs were already pitch black, and the dark blue color continued to extend above her thighs. Everyone was startled and couldn't help but exclaim, "Toxic." Although this wolf cub is only 3 months old, his body is very strong, and his venomous teeth are incredibly powerful. If we really fight for our lives with others, these coachmen in front of us are not its opponents, they are all ingredients for delivering vegetables. The little girl twisted her lower body slightly, gesturing for Hu to put her down. Taking a small step to run in front of the wolf cub, it scared Hu Shi and Chunya into a scream. Jiang Na reached out a small hand and rubbed the little wolf cub's bald head, then grabbed one of its front paws. The little wolf wheezed in his nose, and his green eyes fixed on her. "Chuanya, go get the medicine bag from my car." "Oh, good." Chuanya regained her senses and breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that the little wolf cub had no intention of attacking people. She quickly got on the car and took off the young lady's knitted medicine bag. Opening the medicine bag, there were 7 or 8 small pockets. Jiang Na took out a pair of silver tweezers and pulled out 2 steel needles from the wolf cub's front paws. During this time, the wolf cub whimpered twice, his front paws kept twitching, and the little girl even knocked on Mao Mao's head and shouted, "Don't move." The onlookers were so stunned that they couldn't speak fully. Just now, the wolf cub, who was incredibly brave and easily torn apart in front of the little girl, looked like a very gentle little dog. After applying the medicine and wrapping it briefly, the little girl turned around and walked towards the car with the medicine bag on her shoulder. "Let's go," she said. "It's getting late, if you don't leave at this point, you might miss the previous destination." Everyone else was already dumbfounded, but Wang Pezi, who came from the capital, immediately realized and quickly spoke up, "Miss, do you know medical skills? Can you help Grandma Su check her injuries?" Although it is somewhat unbelievable to seek help from a 6-year-old baby, Mrs. Wang still insisted on giving it a try. After all, this place is still half a day away from the town ahead. If we seek medical treatment in the town, I'm afraid this old lady will not be able to endure it. Jiang Na didn't speak either, just gave Wang Pezi a faint glance, then turned around and got into the car. Wang Pezi's heart was half cold when she saw this. I only felt that the little girl's glance before getting on the car was as clear as if she had understood everything. With a soft thud, the carriage swayed slightly. Chuanya lifted the curtain and exclaimed, "Miss, that little wolf cub has jumped onto the car." "Let it be." The little girl got into the carriage and lazily collapsed on a soft cushion, soft and never wanting to move again. The coachman, however, was not as carefree as she was, trembling and afraid to come up and drive. This little wolf cub is squatting next to his driving seat, who has the courage to sit up. If I get bitten, who should I talk to reason? Chuanya, you go drive. The little girl's soft voice drifted lightly. Yes. Chuanya nodded and accepted the order, accustomed to obeying the instructions of her own girl. Although he also had concerns about the little wolf cub, he was much braver than the coachman. Chuanya lifted the car curtain with one hand, and with a nimble jump, she sat down. The coachman was stunned. Chuanya looks like a little girl of 11 or 12 years old, but at such a young age, ah. The coachman suddenly regained his senses, but saw the carriage galloping away from him and throwing himself off. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Don't force your destiny. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Don't force your destiny, miss, what happened last night? Our Lee family village is 100 miles away, but we have never heard of wolves appearing. Where did this little wolf cub come from? In the carriage, besides the wet nurse there was also an old lady with a cold and stiff face, and a pretty little girl with a lotus face. Grandma Fong is an elderly person beside her grandmother. This time, due to the need for a long trip, my grandmother was not at ease with her, so she brought Grandma Fong over and insisted that she take her on the road. The pretty little girl's name is Chuya, and like Chunya, she is a close girl who grew up with her since childhood. It's just a villain blocking the way, with many branches and branches, Jiang Nai said weakly. I kept repeating my dream last night and didn't sleep well. At this moment, getting on the carriage and feeling tired, Jiang Nai soon fell asleep. When I woke up, I found myself in an inn. It seems that when I fell asleep, the car had already arrived at the small town for lodging. With a creak, Chuanya pushed the door open and said with a happy smile, Miss, you're awake. We borrowed the shopkeeper's kitchen and cooked some congee for the girl, so we'll have a drink first. Jiang Na stayed in bed for half a day without much thought of moving. Chuanya stepped forward to help her dress and tie up, holding her and sitting at the table. Mrs. Su's leg is gone. The doctor said that her life can be saved, but her leg needs to be sawed off. As expected. Jiang Nai took 2 mouthfuls of congee and gave a faint hum. Let me stay alone for a while, you go out. Jiang Na pulled out a carving knife from her small shoulder bag and continued carving an unfinished flower. Chuanya let out a long tune and dragged her way to the door, but couldn't help but turn back and say, Girl, I don't understand. Li Jiatuan, wolves have never appeared before. Chuanya seemed to understand something and suddenly widened her eyes, so, is that little wolf cub brought by Mrs. Su herself? So the young lady would say things like karma and bad intentions leading to bad consequences. Chuanya blinked and said, So. If Mrs. Su had listened to you before and slapped herself, would she really? Can she avoid a disaster? Jiang Na nodded lightly and said, So, that little wolf cub won't bite her anymore. Well, that's just amazing, isn't it? I can bite, but I can save her. Jiang Na suddenly looked up and gave her a smirk. Do you believe it? Chuanya focused her head and said, Whatever Miss says, Chuanya believes it. If she is willing to compensate for this cause and effect, I can naturally let her go. Unfortunately, Mrs. Su made repeated mistakes and remained stubborn, unwilling to turn back. Jiang Nai naturally wouldn't be foolish enough to take on the evil causes and consequences of others. She's not that generous yet. Moreover, this was originally a sneaky conspiracy against her. Jiang Nai shook his head and said, Go out and help me bring the door. Tell them not to disturb me until dawn tomorrow. Oh. As the sun rose in the east, Jiang Na gently caressed the exquisitely carved magnolia in her hand and couldn't help but sigh. I am still young and lack strength in my hands. This magnolia carving is not as good as 10 or 12 in my previous life. Lift your eyes and look out the window. A faint golden sunlight sprinkled on the small poplar in front of the door. Unconsciously, I have been in this world for over 6 years. Time flies like a shuttle. The ancient state of Jiang dates back 3,000 years. In fact, it has long been lost in the passing time, gone forever. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Indifference to people. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Indifference to people. Those scars and dilapidated past are like fleeting clouds, all swept away by time. In her past life, she was the empress of the ancient state of Jiang, and now she is reborn in the Jiang family in Shangjing. 6 years ago, Jiang Nai was sent to the ancestral home of Li Jiatuaner in Lanzhou as soon as she was born. I don't know why I lived here for 6 years. Her grandfather's family treated her extremely well, truly wanting the wind and rain to catch the rain. The thousands of pets lived a life like a salted fish. As soon as her 6-year-old birthday passed, her father, whom she had never met before, suddenly had the idea of taking her home, without knowing which link was wrong. Before leaving, Jiang Nai calculated a hexagram for herself, which showed that the trip was going smoothly, but there were some minor setbacks along the way. Unexpectedly, the twists and turns came quite quickly. People haven't even left the Li family's village, so the matter of being a demon has come. Last night, when the carriage was traveling on the night road, the wheels of the carriage jolted heavily on the stones, and unfortunately, it jolted her out of the carriage and rolled down the slope. This is the story of the fourth girl being taken away by a wild wolf after camping overnight. Jiang Na reached out and flicked the faintly extinguished candle, got up and pulled the door open, letting Autumn Leaf come in to serve her and wash up. Half an hour later, everything was done and Jiang Na got into the carriage. Chuanyao leaned forward and whispered, "Miss, Queen Mother has come to pay her respects and said she wants to apologize to you." "No need," Jiang Na waved her hand coldly and leaned her small body onto the cushion. "I'll sleep for a while." "4 girls, 4 girls. The old servant is here to apologize to you." A shout came from outside the car. Fong Mama's eyes became angry and she quickly lifted the car curtain, scolding Wang Posey, "What a cunning old slave. Why do you make such a desperate appearance? Who should I show you?" Jiang Nai bent down and walked out of the carriage, with a pair of black and white clear pupils brushing against a cool dim light. "Wang Mama, where does it start to apologize? You are an old man from the capital and a considerate person around my second aunt. With the word apologize, I, as a little girl, cannot afford it." For some unknown reason, Wang Pezi looked at the little girl's smiling eyes and couldn't help but shiver, a hint of coldness rising from the bottom of her heart. This 4 girl, who has been raised in the countryside for over 6 years, is not as crude as the village aunt. On the contrary, there is always a hint of terrifying coldness and evil from time to time. Wang Pezi thought to herself, "Fourth Miss looks very unfriendly. Not only being unfriendly, but also seems to be a difficult person to coax." Wang Posey smiled apologetically and bowed, "Fourth Miss, last night it was the servants who were not careful in their work that caused the girl to be thrown out of the carriage and spend the night in the open." "It's good if you know," Fong Mama snorted coldly and interrupted her impatiently. All right, you go." Wang Pezi's face stiffened slightly, and she quickly apologized with a smile, "Let the old servant accompany the 4th girl." "You." Chuanya sneered, "Last night, if it weren't for you and that old lady Sue, they would have squeezed us all out and rode in the same carriage as our girl. How could something happen to the girl? Speaking of which, was this deliberately arranged by you? On purpose?" Akai's eyes widened wide. No, Mrs. Wang waved her hand repeatedly with a guilty heart. "There's absolutely no such thing. Miss, you have to trust the old servant. Wang Mama is the old servant of the Jiang family in Shangjing, so I naturally believe you," Jiang Nai said with a slight curl of her lips. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The 4 Evil Girls. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The 4 evil girls, since you are so loyal and steadfast, you must accompany me. All right, you'll be by my carriage and follow me slowly. Ah. Jiang Na tilted her head and pretended to be surprised. Judging from Wang Mama's expression, it seems that she is somewhat reluctant. Yes, 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 yes. Mrs. Wang couldn't help but feel bitter. How could she not know at this moment that the 4th miss was intentionally teasing her? Although this little girl is only 6 years old, she seems so powerful now. Wang Pezi turned her head with a bitter face and was frightened by the little wolf cub who suddenly jumped next to her, causing her legs to soften, and she sat down on the ground with a thud. 4 girls. Oh, it's okay, it doesn't bite. Jiang Nai lazily glanced at Wang Pozi and put down the car curtain to sit back. The little wolf cub's eyes lit up with green light, and he ran around at the feet of Wang Pozi, scaring the old woman almost to the point of urinary incontinence. He shouted loudly, "Girl, 4th girl." Jiang Nai lifted the small window curtain on the side and waved at the little wolf cub, "Rich and noble, come here." The wolf cub shook his head and leaped to the top of the carriage, lying there with a majestic presence, brushing his shiny black tail. The sound of rustling claws crawling came from above the carriage, and when Jiang Na saw it subside, she no longer cared about it. "Miss, did you even name this little wolf cub?" said Choya in surprise. Jiang Na lazily released her finger and put down the small window curtain. "Why is it called wealth? Blooming flowers brings prosperity, auspiciousness, and auspiciousness. In the future, if you don't want to have a kitten or puppy, just call it blooming flowers. Auspiciousness is welcome. Autumn leaves, spring buds. Misnaming is quite casual." Before long, Grandma Fong whispered to the little girl, "That old lady is following me. Follow her." Jiang Na lazily dozed off on the cushion. "Miss, you see this little wolf cub is so old. Why don't we just release him back into the wild forest?" said Mrs. Wang with a few awkward smiles in her ear. Jiang Na lifted the small curtains and gave her a soft smile, with a hint of sweetness in her soft voice. "That's not possible. There has never been a wild wolf near Lijiatuan before, so it's not lonely to keep it here. It's better to take it back and return it to its original owner, don't you think so, Mom?" Upon hearing this, Wang Pezi's whole body trembled. When she looked up again, she saw that the little girl had already put down the small curtains. But Wang Pezi's heart was pounding with drums, and now the more she looked at this little girl, the more she felt that the evil energy was pressing. At a young age, there seems to be a hint of inhumane and terrifying aura all over my body. Jiang Na slept for a while and only sat up in a cold sweat at noon, which startled Grandma Fong and others. "Miss, have you had a nightmare?" Chuanya quickly took a dry handkerchief and wiped her sweat. Jiang Nai's eyebrows furrowed slightly, his thoughts vague, and he couldn't recall the taste. Strange, with her current skills, reciting the reincarnation mantra several times would definitely be useful. Could it be that the old ghost in the painting has profound Taoist skills? Just as I closed my eyes, I saw that cold and stern face again. To what extent is it clear? Clear enough to see even the opponent's dark circles and long eyelashes very clearly. I felt the handsome young man sitting beside me glaring angrily, a faint fragrance of sandalwood brushing over my face. Jiang Na was startled and struggled repeatedly before waking up. Subconsciously took the handkerchief from Chunya's hand and wiped her small face. Opening the car window, Wang followed beside the car, her face covered in vegetable color and sweating profusely. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Dharma Tools. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Dharma Tools. The next day, Wang Pezi collapsed due to poor health. She followed Jiang Nai's carriage for most of the day, alternating between sunbathing and sweating, her body suddenly hot and cold. During the night stay that night, a series of blisters appeared on the feet. The next day when I came over, my feet were swollen like a pair of fat pig hooves. People also sweated profusely and had a high fever, unable to get up from bed at all. In the end, they were carried onto the carriage by several coachmen, so they naturally lacked the strength to become demons. When Chiuya came back to inquire and told everyone couldn't help but laugh back and forth. So we remained safe all the way. Wang Pozi felt a hint of fear towards the fourth girl in her heart, urging the convoy to return to Beijing as quickly as possible. The original 20-day journey was abruptly shortened by 5 days. That afternoon, Jiang Nai and his delegation entered the capital city. Mrs. Wang, who has been ill for about 10 days, is in great spirits today and insists on squeezing into their carriage, claiming to be very close to the fourth girl. This old woman is 2 inches wide alone. As soon as she comes in, the wet nurse Hu and Fang Mama can only go out. Wang Pozi sat on one side with a smiling face, and neither Chuanya nor Chiuya paid attention to her. Jiang Na was completely nestled on a soft cushion, with a hint of lethargy in her expression. I didn't sleep well for more than 10 days in a row, and as soon as I closed my eyes, I saw the plague-stricken guy sitting next to my bed, not speaking, staring at me with a gloomy gaze. It's like a ghost. If I can sleep well like this, I'm really scared. Pooh. The mantra of rebirth is useless even after reciting it many times. Now, Jiang Nai can only secretly intensify the production of magical tools to ward off evil spirits. With her current small physique, it takes 3 days to carve a magical tool. Calculating the days, it will take another 6 days to gather 9 magic weapons, which is really deadly. When she was growing up, the old ghost wouldn't let her sleep, just like killing her whole family. This revenge is not a gentleman. But it's strange to say that this old ghost has been looking increasingly thin in recent days. The waist was originally thin, as if it could be broken with just one hand. Now, it's so thin that it's almost out of shape. A dark blue stubble print has grown on the chin. Hey, what do you think about that millennium-old ghost when you have nothing to do? Miss C, it's bustling in the capital city. Aren't you getting off the car and looking around? You old lady, you don't know how to behave, Autumn Leaf said angrily with a cold and pretty face. My girl hasn't even spoken, why are you slurping around? Jiang Nai gave Wang Pezi a deep look with her eyes. Why, there's already a scene arranged for me here. Wang Pozi's body instantly stiffened into a stone and said, Auntie, you really know how to joke. Well, this is a big day, where did the play come from? Hee hee. If not, that's good. Jiang Na nodded and made a soft and sticky sound, with a smiling expression on her face. Mammy, your body is about to improve now, but you can't bear any more trouble. Do you understand what I mean? Wang Pezi looked into those deep valley-like cold and icy eyes at a glance. Glancing again, I saw this young girl with a round face that still had a deep smile on it, and there was no frost, snow, or cold light. Illusion, it must be her own illusion. Mrs. Wang took a deep breath and forced a smile at the little girl. The carriage stumbled and turned into a street, stopping in front of a black gate. Chuanya was taken aback for a moment, then lifted the curtain and looked out. Arrived. Jiang Na rubbed her eyes and was helped down from the carriage by Autumn Leaf. Falling to the ground, Jiang Nai's gaze lightly swept over the 2 servants guarding the door. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Can't you leave the main gate? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Can't you leave the main gate? Isn't this the main entrance? The Jiang family in Shangjing, a high-ranking official of the 3rd rank, and the main gate of the residence of the Minister of Justice, cannot be so impoverished. The black lacquered wood on top of this has a bit of paint peeling off. Whose court official's main gate is so poorly repaired? Wang Pezi gave an awkward smile. Is this the 4th girl from Lijiaden, Lianzhou? Before Mrs. Wang could speak out, a 50-year-old man with a fat figure and a woolen headscarf ran down the steps with a smile. 4th Miss, the old slave king is here. He is the steward of our Jiang family's outer courtyard, he said with a playful smile as he arched his hand towards Jiang Na. Come and go, fourth miss, please come in. The old servant will send someone to report to the old lady, second lady, and third lady. Jiang Na's gaze brushed over this person's face, looking at him with a smile on his face. Manager Wang, right? Wang Lai's expression froze for a moment, and he secretly thought to himself, I don't know if it's an illusion. I always felt that the glance these four girls just cast seemed to have a hint of mockery and sympathy. Can't I leave the main entrance of the Jiang family? Wang Lai quickly put on a smile and said in a good voice, fourth miss, don't be angry. This is actually what second madam means. However, the second lady is also doing it for the good of the fourth girl. The second lady said that the child's body is tender, and walking through the main door may be a stroke of luck, which is not good for her health. Jiang Na showed a sudden realization, her small head tilted slightly, and her gaze swept towards Chunya standing behind her. Chunya nodded knowingly and immediately took 2 steps forward. Like catching a chick, she suddenly reached out and grabbed the steward Wang in front of her. With a big slap, she delivered 2 big-mouthed shots. Wang, the steward, was struck by these 2 slaps, feeling dizzy and angry, and his old face suddenly turned red with pork liver. Miss C, what do you mean by this? As soon as he spoke, Chunya reached out again and gave him 2 big ear scrapes. Wang Lai only felt a dull pain in his cheeks, and when he slapped his 4 ears, even his teeth felt a bit shaky. The rules of the Jiang family in Shangjing are just like this, Chunya said coldly. A servant dog dares to question our girl in person, humph. You're really shameless. Jiang Na couldn't help but look tired as she lazily turned around and walked towards the carriage. Which is the best inn in the capital? If I were to return to the girl, it should be Xian Leiju. Jiang Nai lazed on the mat as she got in the car, then go there and settle down first. Oh, by the way, find someone to send a letter to the Ministry of Justice, asking my father to come to the Xianlai residence to pick me up. Jiang Na covered her mouth and yawned slightly, feeling lethargic as she said, if you don't come to pick me up before tomorrow, let's go back to Lianzhou. Wang Lai's eyelids twitched heavily. The Wang Pazi standing on the side was sweating profusely and unable to speak. Watching the little girl's wheels rolling along the corner of the street, Wang Lai slapped his thighs heavily, gritted his teeth, and covered his high swollen cheeks, exclaiming in surprise, it's broken. Wang Pazi quickly patted her thigh and complained, Big brother, why don't you discuss with me and come out like this? I'll tell you, these 4 girls are really impressive. Wang Lai sweated profusely and said, this is what second madam means. What should we do now? Is the old lady still waiting for the 4th girl over there? The 2 of them looked at each other in a sweat-filled waterfall, and hurriedly went to report to their second wife, Jiang Yaoshe. Now it's great. The 4th girl has been angered by her clumsiness. If the matter were to be exposed to the old master, no one's face would look good. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Are you a human or a ghost? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Are you a human or a ghost? Chunya lit up her golden seal, and the old shopkeeper of Xian Leiju personally came to welcome Jiang Nai and his team to the best top-quality Tianzi courtyard. After everything was arranged properly, Jiang Nai was really tired and unable to stop, so she turned off the lights and lay down in her clothes. Before going to bed, he threw out 4 carved magnolias. 4 white magnolias shone with dazzling white magic, quietly floating on the 4 sides of the bed pillars. Jiang Nai silently recited the Xuanzong of heaven and earth, the root of 10,000 qi exorcism curse, and fell asleep with his eyes closed. I don't know how long it took, but Jiang Nai suddenly opened her eyes and saw the young man sitting beside her, his whole body almost bursting with sweat and hair. Don't be busy disappearing yet, the cold voice of the young man came into her ear, appearing particularly clear. The young man was furious with her every time he saw her, but when we met again, his eyes were as calm as a dry well, with only a hint of helplessness. "It's a person or a ghost?" Jiang Nai stood ready and couldn't help but shout out. "I don't know if it's due to her illusion, but I always feel that this young man is thinner than when I saw him the day before yesterday. Is it true that there are still 2 magic tools left, but it doesn't work? Nowadays, the small exorcism array formed by these 4 magical tools cannot suppress this old monster." The young man in front of him was slightly taken aback, and a hint of a different color suddenly surged in his eyes, which were dull and displeased. "You can be considered to have come in." Jiang Na felt her small body fall into the other person's palm in one fell swoop, and the person's cool fingers landed on her small neck, causing pain. "Hee, stinky girl, for most of the past month, she has only been immersed in her form and spirit. Today, I finally managed to wait for her to physically enter the mountain-dwelling map." A sharp gleam shone in someone's eyes, and they were wondering if they wanted to kill this guy directly in their hands. Jiang Na was carried in mid-air by him, swaying her 2 short legs, her expression changing again and again. How could this ghost still catch her? You should know that since inheriting the lineage of the ancient Jiang family, it has been difficult for demons and monsters to approach her. What exactly is this thing, so violent? Cough, cough, cough. Jiang Na felt her neck loosen, and a surge of fresh air rushed in, causing her to cough repeatedly. Looking up, the ghostly young man changed hands and picked up her collar, looking at her with an uncertain expression. "If I kill her now, I probably won't be able to get out." Shen Yi thought to himself. Seeing this girl's bewildered and confused demeanor, he estimated that he couldn't even figure out where this place was. "Let's talk." Shen Yi suppressed his anger and said coldly. A cold light flashed through Jiang Na's eyes, and with a slight movement of her fingers, more than 10 small iron beads flew out of her fingertips, swiftly shooting towards the young man's body. The 2 of them were very close, and Jiang Na was caught off guard again. Shen Yi was startled and could only dodge away from her, but no matter how fast he moved, he was hit in the arm by one of the small iron beads. I suddenly felt half of my arms tingling. Jiang Na looked puzzled and murmured in a low voice, "Isn't it a ghost?" Being hit by her iron plow bead on the body is naturally not something like a ghost. "If you don't bring the food over again, I'm afraid you'll starve me into a ghost sooner or later." Jiang Nai blinked and looked around in his spare time. He couldn't help but be greatly surprised and thought to himself, "This scenery. It looks a bit like the painting she burned down half a month ago." "That's the painting," Shen Yi said coldly. "You burned that mountain-dwelling painting and locked me in it, so I can't get out. You've been starving me for half a month." Jiang Na. "Friends, let's chat a few words. The female lead has a soft and cute appearance, but a cold heart. She was an empress in her past life, so she is a true big female lead. Consider the overall situation and start from oneself. Don't elevate to morality, because the empress is the empress. Don't expect a person who was an emperor in a previous life to have much kindness. It can be said that she is evil, but she is not a weak little white flower around the CEO. Don't look at characters from a god's perspective. You want the female lead to treat the male lead much better from the beginning, it's natural. The female lead is intimate, while the male lead and supporting roles are all selected. If you just make a random conclusion after looking at dozens of photos, you may face criticism in the future. For example, condemning the female lead for burning a painting and imprisoning the male lead, as well as raising moral standards among the little friends. I won't be a spoiler even if I'm beaten to death. I can only say that I can't eat fat in one breath. Don't expect the author, June, to explain everything to you in just 30 or 40 chapters. There's nothing wrong with it. Take your time to see the whole picture. Additionally, I recommend the author June to complete the book. Don't miss out on passing by, end of this chapter.